I first met Jim on a gray January morning when the sky looked like it had been dusted in ash and forgotten. He walked into the warehouse with the kind of quiet that turned heads, not because he made a show of himself, but because he didn't. Jim moved through the world like a whisper carried on a winter wind, soft, but impossible to ignore if you were paying attention. Every day, he wore the same navy blue jacket that hung off his shoulders like it had stories of its own, and he drank his coffee black, no sugar, no cream, the kind of brew that could peel paint off drywall. He never spoke unless necessary, and when he did, it was with the tone of a man who'd spent more time listening than most people spent breathing. He was a delivery tech for our company, making routine runs to clients, ensuring that products arrived in mint condition and clients didn't bite too hard. It was thankless work, like being the roadie in a rock band that never toured. But Jim never complained. He just did his job like a monk tending to sacred scrolls, meticulous and silent. The legend of Jim might have remained a warehouse whisper if it weren't for the incident at Summit Works. It was a Tuesday, the kind where everything smells like wet cardboard and your shoes squeak louder than your thoughts. Jim had been dispatched, as usual, to deliver a batch of custom-fitted components. Summit Works was one of our oldest accounts, and like any long-term relationship, it came with its fair share of quirks, like Craig. Craig was Summit Works' newly minted quality control manager. Mid-30s, gel-slick hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a confidence that walked 2 steps ahead of him. He fancied himself a one-man revolution in a company too slow to keep up. The kind of guy who corrected your grammar while you were talking and kept a mirror in his desk drawer. When Jim rolled up to Summit Works, Craig was waiting with the kind of grin that usually precedes a storm. Before the delivery cart even clicked to a stop, Craig pounced like a house cat on a red laser dot. "This is all wrong," he said, flipping open a manual as thick as a family Bible. His voice sliced the air like a serrated knife. "These fittings don't align with Section 4A, Subset D, look here." He jabbed a manicured finger at a diagram. "And this? This is completely backward. Do you even know how this assembly works?" Jim stood quietly, one hand resting on the crate like it was an old friend. He didn't blink. Didn't flinch. The wind outside made more noise than he did. Craig was just warming up. He flipped another page, then another. Diagrams spilled forth like a magician's trick deck: wires, bolts, cross-sections, the whole mechanical symphony. Each one came with a lecture from Craig, delivered with the smug assurance of a TED Talk. Jim let him talk. It was like watching a volcano erupt into an empty canyon. Steam, sound, fury, all of it swallowed by silence. And then it happened. Craig turned the page again and tapped a photo in the corner. It was a black and white image of a young man, sleeves rolled to the elbows, elbow deep in a tangle of wires and parts. His expression was one of focused calm, like a chess master mid-game. Jim leaned in, pointed with one weathered finger. "Do you see the name tag on that guy?" Craig squinted. There, pinned to the coveralls, was a faded name, Jim. Jim nodded once. "That's me. I wrote this manual 20 years ago." Silence cracked through the room like thunder after lightning. You could hear the air conditioning change its mind. Craig blinked. Once. Twice. He looked from the photo to Jim and back like he'd just seen a ghost crawl out of the past and offer him a handshake. What could he say? What could anyone say? I wasn't there, but the story flew back to us like a homing pigeon with a tale to tell. By lunch, everyone in the warehouse knew. By the end of the day, someone had photocopied that image and tacked it to the corkboard, with the words, "Respect your elders." Especially when they wrote the book. Jim didn't bask in the glow. He came back, logged his report, and refilled his coffee like he hadn't just shattered the sound barrier of corporate ego. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how a man could walk through decades with his legacy tucked beneath his flannel, never once calling attention to the fact that the rest of us were still tracing lines he'd drawn long ago. A week later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. The envelope was creased at the corners like it had been opened and closed more than once. Jim slid it from the envelope and read it at his desk, his expression unreadable as the morning fog. "Jim. Thank you. For setting me straight without making me feel small. I've reread your manual. Twice. I had no idea. I'm learning now. Craig. Jim folded the letter, slipped it into the back of his notebook, and closed it like a chapter. But something had shifted. A few weeks later, SummitWorks invited him in not for a delivery, but to consult. Help modernize their protocols. Add digital annotations to the manual. He resisted at first. Said he was too old. Too tired. But his eyes said something else. The following month, Jim was spending every Friday at SummitWorks. Teaching. Explaining. Guiding. He didn't just show them what to do, he told them why it mattered. His lessons weren't lectures, but stories. He spun complex processes into metaphors, circuits were nervous systems, bolts were spine joints, wiring diagrams became treasure maps. He taught them how a machine thinks. How to hear it breathe. When something was wrong, Jim didn't grab tools, he listened. Like a doctor with a stethoscope pressed against the metal chest of industry. When the updated manual finally rolled off the presses, it had all the digital bells and whistles, clickable diagrams, holographic overlays, video walkthroughs. But on the dedication page, there it was. Adapted from the original work of Jim W. With enduring gratitude. Jim retired quietly a year later. No cake. No speeches. Just a handshake from the foreman, and a lunch bag swinging from his hand as he walked to his truck, the same way he always had. But we remembered. And in every new hire orientation, there's a part of the tour that stops at the corkboard with the faded photo. That's Jim, I tell them. He wrote the manual. They smile politely, nod, and we move on. But I always wait. Because one day, when they make their first mistake, when someone hands them that same manual to learn from, they'll see the photo again. And they'll remember. They'll remember that sometimes the man you thought was just the delivery guy is actually the architect of your success. That respect isn't owed to the loudest voice or the newest title, but to the hands that built the path you walk. And in those quiet moments of realization, when knowledge finally clicks into place like the last bolt in a perfect assembly, they'll understand the truth that hung like smoke in the air that day at SummitWorks. Jim didn't just write the manual. He was the manual.